The views and opinions expressed by the guests of Sasquatch Experience do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the hosts, sponsors, or affiliates of the Sasquatch Experience. As always, listener discretion is advised.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Does a legend walk among us, lurking in the forests of our world?
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my sensor light came on and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was.
For over 15 years, we've talked with scientists, researchers, investigators, and witnesses, trying to gain insight and proof around the existence of this mysterious entity.
Jesus Christ, you better... Ted, Gio!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
You see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right...
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Join us as we continue into the investigation of the Sasquatch Experience. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sasquatch Experience, Monday, October 18th, 2021. Guys, it's great to be back with you here tonight. Welcome back.
Oh, hey, Sean. That's okay. Don't mind me. I just took my knee out on my desk here, but we'll be
Nancy
fine.
Kerrigan yourself. Gotcha.
No,
Well, hello, Vance,
911
James. Vance and Henry and Baker with us tonight, guys. Somebody asked me last week, Forker, why did you make the intro longer? And I did it for a very selfish reason. It's less editing later when I go to put this. So instead of having to cut and split and cut, I just, whatever. It'll get better as we go along. But thanks for tuning in tonight, folks, or wherever you're listening. It's that time of the week again. Episode 37, the 411, as we continue season 4 of The Missing, guys. Last week we talked about the disappearance of Dennis Martin, and what a week it's been in between. I don't know about you, but I've spent some time really, as I said before we started this, we weren't going to prep every episode, right? We were going to kind of go into this and let it flow organically. But today I spent a decent part of my day, just diving right into the David Paulides material, and I've been listening to certain podcasts and YouTube videos as we've gone through. I don't like this view because you can't see me when we go on to the three
You're not missing
screen.
Anything. No.
Or there we go. Yeah, he'll be back.
Yeah.
I'm going to move my camera here. Sorry. So I've been trying to prep for this. And I tell you what, the more and more I get further into this stuff, the more depressing it actually gets.
It can. Yes. Depending on how emulsified you get into it. Very much so.
Yeah,
Bringing up the
downer.
Paulides thing. Well, when I first started and I think it's probably been 5-6 years now, when he came out with the first book. It's very disturbing. And I think that's what launched it, or as a catalyst into this whole subject thing of what if there is an unknown entity involved in these situations. But yeah, it does get kind of disturbing, but they are interesting reads. And I think what brings more compelling factor into it is that it's real. These stories are not fictional. These are true stories.
No, absolutely. And I think that's something that, weighs on me pretty significantly. This would be easier to go into if they were made up stories,
Mhm.
but the fact these are people that, in many cases their fate's still uncertain,
Mhm.
just really problematic,
Mhm.
and it's heartbreaking in some instances, especially when you're dealing with the missing children.
Right. Right.
And there are reasons. I mean, as we're going through and listening to some of these, some of them could really be predated on by large, woodland animals, mountain
Mhm.
lions, bears. Those are
Mhm.
reality and the reality we live in. But
Mhm.
you can't take away for a moment, if you're in this field that we're in, this strange cryptozoological field, and discount the potentiality for a potential Bigfoot.
Right.
Right. And as we get into this show a little later, we're going to talk about, there's like 11 points David talks about in his books that come together that, all these cases have some semblance, maybe not all 11 points, but they have a decent amount that
Yeah.
combined and go into one,
There's a
into one
common
kind of
thread.
case.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a
That
common thread.
commonality.
Mhm.
I don't know about what did you find getting into this, or how do you go? I'll ask you guys, each of you, as we go through here. How do you feel about all this? Like we're 1 week in. We just talked about Dennis Martin, and as we start going into these other things, how are you feeling about it?
Go ahead, Bake.
Well, I feel that as we look into these things, we look in at a lens to see what we can find that maybe somebody, to talk about it, get more information out there, figure out may have what went on. But the thing is like, we're not taking it as it must be supernatural, or it must be a crypto, or it must be whatever. We're more on the phase of this is what happened, and it's kind of odd that people and that the stories are being like cross patched so that certain people don't think it could be that. We're going at it with a logical mind instead of just assessing it must be this thing.
Mhm.
No, good
Mhm.
point.
Mhm. No, it is a good point. Like I
We
said,
keep
when I
losing
first
Henry somewhere. He's the missing.
He's back.
Okay,
He keeps
Yeah,
slipping
well,
into a space-time continuum.
must be a big thing.
that's fine, because that just adds to the whole complex of 411 here.
There you go. Go ahead,
Like
Vance.
I
As you were saying.
said, going 5-6 years, and unfortunately, I really didn't look at the calendar to see when the first book came out. But I was introduced to David Paulides through Coast to Coast AM, and heard an
Yeah.
interview and how the whole story came about with David getting involved in these cases. And then once he started looking a little bit deeper into it, he started finding these common threads. He eliminated a number of cases that were deliberately um, provoked for somebody to want to go missing, or it was found that it was a suicide, and all that
Yeah.
stuff. He sifted through all of that, but left the cases open where the mysterious circumstances in some of these cases is just so profound. And then there's commonality, but it was the mileage between all these cases. And then the more he explored, the more we explored, we find out this is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just limited
Yeah.
to national parks in the United States, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And you can draw your conclusions. Many people, many interviewers have asked David straight up, what do you think? He won't say. And I can't say I blame him. I think he has his personal philosophy as to what is going on, but you don't want to break that because you could be wrong. And that's
So a lot of the criticism he gets from this is, kind of what you said. He didn't really find anything. The data's already been there. But
Mhm.
to your point though, like you said, somebody had to sift through it.
Mhm.
Somebody had to look through these files, and somebody had to put two and two together. Look, and that takes a specific eye
Mhm.
to do something like that. And
Mhm.
David put a lot of time and effort into this. I mean,
Right.
one of the things I did today was I explored, and I specifically specifically searched criticisms of David Paulides, because I wanted to know, I have my own personal opinions.
Mhm.
I've talked to David. I interviewed him many years ago on Beyond the Edge Radio, myself, Eric Altman, and Lon Strickler.
Mhm.
And he said some things to us off air that were not any different than what he said on air, but he said them with a little bit more fact of the matter, a little bit more that this is what he believes and what he would be willing to share.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his prerogative to do so. He's well within his rights to do that. But I think also you're talking to a guy who's making his rounds on coast to coast. He's trying to get this information out there. He's raising awareness for it. He's doing UFOs conferences, Bigfoot conferences, high strangeness conferences. When you start putting your definitive stamp on something, you're going to lose interest from one of those communities. Because the Bigfoot people aren't going to want to hear from anybody that says they were abducted by extraterrestrials. And the UFO people aren't going to want to hear about the Bigfoot people.
Right.
You know, so you really have to be careful how you're putting that information out there without trying to alienate any of the potential people. Because believe it or not, we're all consumers. We're all buying into this. And this money that we spend into this phenomena is enabling David to continue on with this work. So you can call him snake oil or whatever, but it doesn't change the facts that if he's not investigating this, shit's not going on with it.
Right. And you have to give him at least a little bit of kudos that there is no case that he reports in his books. Kind of does like what Stan Gordon does. He takes the reports and he's just putting it in there. Yes, there's his analogy to the common threads of all these cases, but he's taking actual facts. And like at the very beginning of the show here, it's incredible on the record keeping that is just a complete and total failure on the federal government's end of national parks for people that go missing.
But,
well, go ahead, James.
But the question of that is it a failure or is it a deliberate failure? The fact is that did they put people in charge that were supposed to ignore it, or did they pull people from in charge that weren't ignoring it?
Well, that's the big question.
And that's where, listening to his presentations are important because as our executive producer was at one of these conferences, the gist of David's speaking, his presentation was that there is a cover up from the national parks. I mean, I think I read the same reporting from it that you guys did. Am I wrong? And did I interpret that incorrectly? Because I think, that's what our EP was telling us, that there's something to this. But James, that's probably one of the more significant questions that, I also have is, and we're going to step back here a minute in my thought process, because, as we said in the last show, there's no national database from National Park Service that is reporting these missing people. However, it's being documented somewhere in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
What David said is there's no national database he can go into and search, that there's no records, that they're not keeping records. That doesn't mean they're not keeping reports. A report is just part of the record. It's not the record. And maybe in some instances it is. If you only have the report, then that's the whole record on that case. But where's it stored? Where's it maintained? Who's looking into it? That doesn't go anywhere. They all literally become cold cases. And, as we go back to last week's show, what did I say? There were 29 active cold cases that the FBI is investigating. 29 of thousands of people missing. 29 of them are getting attention. What makes those 29 people so important?
Money.
I don't know. Well, not really, because some of these people don't have any, Jane.
Or
and you would think that would be the easy answer.
Or popularity. I mean, honestly, like the girl that came missing a little while ago, if she wouldn't have been an influencer or on the internet, would there be such a deal about her?
Well, and you make that point, and when you and I were doing our presentation at Hocking Hills, we said the same thing. There's hundreds of Native American and people of different ethnic backgrounds that disappeared, but the only time someone cares is when they're a blonde YouTuber, blonde white YouTuber. And there's a sad reality to that you have to have too many people that click on your like button before anybody gives a damn that you're missing.
Right.
That's the part that is, that's disturbing about the whole thing. Now, as we talked about, James, putting people in charge that are willing to look the other way. You put yourself, when you get to a certain level in any kind of government office, you are a political figure.
Mm-hmm.
You're a bureaucrat. You're not doing the job. You're not Ranger Rick anymore. You're the desk supervisor. And when something bad happens in your park, there's a lot of ramification that you have to deal with. And a lot of it is keeping these parks open so they can continue to generate dollars.
Right.
For the
the
National
federal
Park
government.
Service.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And here's our EP chimes in that said Paulides said he wanted a list of all the missing persons, and the Park Service said it would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, Brian, I think the figure he gave on one podcast was like $1.6 million or more. It was an incredible amount of money. Because think about it, they're not saying give us $1.6 million and I'm going to give you this paper trail. It's this amount of money is for all the effort it's going to take to compile this information for you. Because I don't think I want to say the national park system is entirely nefarious. They might be ignorant, but I don't know if they're entirely nefarious. You're talking about an awful lot of data that nobody has.
Right. But then they're governed by the Department of the Interior. So, there's your superiors, the Department of the Interior, and they're going to dictate how they want these monies to come in.
And you really think they're going to want to put money and throw money out there to prove something snatching people in national parks so then they can't leave them open to the public and cost millions of dollars in tourism a year?
Right. No.
Or other ramifications that
the
would
big
have.
Mystery.
It is a mystery. I mean, even though, one can make the case that it's just good business, it's still a mystery as to why we would continually want to put people at risk for those things, right? We go back to David Paulides. For those people who may not be too familiar with David Paulides, David is a former police officer who spent 16 and a half years, I think, for the San Jose Police Department, if I'm right, Vance. And he worked in various departments. He was a detective.
He ended up as a detective. I believe he worked with the SWAT team and then
at one point,
transferred himself over to as detective for what's the word I was looking department for? Well, I mean
street crimes.
Street crime, right?
Yeah. I'm just pulling up his bio here. David, we did ask David Paulides several times to join us on the show. His schedule just didn't permit it. So this isn't we're going to beat David Paulides up because he's not here, because we'd have the same conversation with him, though probably a little bit more engaging. But David really started making his names in our circle because of the Bigfoot books, the Hoopa Project and Tribal Bigfoot, which were pretty decent volumes. And he had partnered with a forensic artist to do some artwork for his books. And, he also purchased the track record of Ray Crow, the late Ray Crow. And I think he digitized that, and that's available on the his website. North American Bigfoot Search, I think, is the name of the website. You can Google that and get a link right to it. Or canamissing.com. That'll also take you to the Bigfoot store where you can buy his, I think, how many books did I say he's written now on this?
10.
Yeah, 10 books. And you can get the two Bigfoot books he wrote, which are, it's a very specific way he writes. It's very data driven. And if you're looking for Catcher in the Rye, it's not. Henry, you've been on.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Vance. No, go ahead, please.
No, it's just a real quick plug. Also, there are 2 free David Paulides movies that his son, who unfortunately is no longer with us due to self-inflicted injury, but I don't want to get on that. There are 2 free of David Paulides movies. Missing 411 and Missing 411 The Hunter or The Hunters or Hunted.
The Hunted, yeah.
And they're both very compelling, very well done, and it will kind of give you a flavor as to what all the books are, because there's some stuff in here that is just, it'll give you chills, because this is happening. This is factual. This is happening. How does somebody go out with a group of people to go hunting, and then one just disappears, and yet there is no trace anywhere
Again.
of the missing individual. There is just zero evidence and trace and nothing going on. Anyway, enough of that. So if you want to head over to YouTube, you can watch those. It's relevant to what we're talking about tonight.
We're going to jump into that after the commercial, the news break. Henry, before you were jumping in and out of the space-time continuum there, buddy. Sorry. I had asked everybody to give their opinion and how they're feeling about walking down this path and into the missing 401 phenomena and, their initial thoughts. And I just want to know where you stood with all that before we jump into our the news segment.
No. Okay. It's a good point.
Henry?
He's in deliberation right now.
I
promise
thought.
you, folks, we did not take a still image of Henry and throw him there to make it. All right, it's creeping me out. Okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
He's still frozen in the green room. He's still frozen. Anyhow,
he's not
folks, while we try to get Henry back, let's just go ahead and jump into our news break since we're pretty close. Before we do that, I guess I'll throw some of our promotional information up there quick. You can support the show, patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience. Starts at $2 a month. You get ad-free shows and some exclusive stuff that's coming your way. We're a little behind on the content, folks, but we got it coming in droves. Lots of content coming for you. Starts at $2 a month. And, of course, social media, Sasquatch Experience on Facebook, Instagram, Squatch EXP on Twitter. And, of course, you can always email us at SasquatchExperience.com. That's not the email I wanted, but that's okay. SquatchExperience@gmail.com. You can also go to our website, SasquatchExperience.com, and hit contact us or report your sighting, because we do take them and we investigate them. If we're not close enough, we send them to somebody who are. So on that note, folks, smoke them if you got them. We'll be right back right after this Stranger Than Fiction news with Vance Nesbitt.
This is the Sasquatch Experience, Stranger Than Fiction news and stories, brought to you by Dr. Squatch soaps and shampoos. Funny names, but the stuff smells great. Just click the banner for some amazing savings. And our patrons. Become part of the experience and join us as a patron. Just go to patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience for as little as $2 a month. And now, page one with an important headline. An Idaho town is upended in the search for a missing boy. Michael Joseph Vaughn, 5 years of age, was last seen on July 27th near his home in Fruitland, Idaho, according to the boy's family. Police say they have no leads. For 10 days, the quiet bedroom community of Fruitland, Idaho, has been overrun by drones, canine units, and hordes of on-foot volunteers, all scouring the area in a desperate effort to find a 5-year-old boy whose family calls him Monkey. Fruitland's 12 police officers, aided by more than a dozen local agencies, the FBI, and state and county police, have searched over 3,000 acres of land, 200 residences and businesses, 200 trash cans, septic tanks, and 29 miles of the Snake River bank bordering Idaho and Oregon, looking for any sign of the missing child, Michael Joseph Vaughn. Mayor Brian Howell said residents had never seen anything like this in Fruitland. "It is a pretty incredible little town," Mr. Howell said. "Everyone is looking for him." He even personally joined some search efforts in the fields near Michael's home in Fruitland, a population of 5,400 residents, and about 50 miles northwest of Boise. The town, though not agricultural itself, is surrounded by farmland, part of the largely rural Payette County. Over 2,500 hours of searching have yielded very few, if any, developments. Investigators have been working just as hard now as they did when he first went missing, Mr. Howell said. They are literally leaving no stone unturned. They're draining all the canals, they're checking homes, and they're doing everything that they can do. The police have said that residents have been helping search efforts. Many have allowed officers to check their homes several times, and people in the area have called in over 160 tips and provided 60 surveillance videos from residents and local businesses. The outpouring care, time, love, and support has been beyond anything we could imagine, Brandy Neal, Michael's mother, wrote on Facebook last week. This is an unimaginable nightmare. Michael was last seen on July 27th around 6:30 or 7 p.m. near his house. He was wearing a blue Minecraft t-shirt and black boxer briefs with lime green trim. Police Chief Huff said at a news conference on Wednesday that the authorities had not eliminated any possibility and that the priority of the investigation continued to be finding Michael. Quote, I have to tell you, I spent my entire childhood in the neighborhood where Michael went missing, Chief Huff said at the news conference. My children are growing up here. My law enforcement partners and mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles or friends of children just like Michael were all in committed to finding Michael. Chief Huff said that he would continue to use national resources available to him, including a dive team to look at the bed of the Snake River. On a personal note, I have taken great interest in this particular case, and I have looked to where Fruitland is located. It's about halfway down the state of Idaho that borders Oregon along the Snake River. There is a lot of mountainous terrain. There's a lot of greenery that runs through the valleys of the mountainous terrain, and there happens to be a very small cave system. Again, these are just facts about situations that are a common thread amongst many cases where those have gone missing. Thanks again for listening to the Sasquatch Experience, Stranger Than Fiction news and stories. And now let's continue with the 411.
Thanks, Vance,
Mm-hmm.
for that, relevant news topic, right? Like we have been talking about how these stories keep happening. They didn't stop just because we started talking about it.
No.
Which is kind of, and hopefully, we get answers to this young, missing person very soon. Our thoughts
Right.
with their family, of course, and just want some resolution, bring the boy home. Because, as this is becoming very important for all of us and very personal.
Mm-hmm.
As we start, once again, taking this trip down this really strange and bizarre topic.
Right.
Baker and Henry, welcome back. Henry, you with us?
Yes.
All right. So before we went to break and lost you, I had asked everyone else to, kind of give us where they're at so far emotionally and mentally with this topic that we're doing and, how you feel about it in general.
Well, it's an interesting subject, and as you mentioned a few minutes ago, Paulides went about this through Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
He actually he wrote a couple of fascinating Bigfoot books, and then he moves on to this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the Bigfoot led him to this, or not Bigfoot physically took him by the hand and led him to this topic, but do you think the research that he was doing in Bigfoot took him down this rabbit hole?
Well, now he is always careful to say that he does not think the Sasquatch is responsible for any of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
Nah, whether you say it or infer it's not really different.
No, and that's a good point, Sean. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Because my take from it is that he will not give a specific personal opinion about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is
Is
different.
fair. Which I think is fair. Right. He may have a whole solution in his heart, but he's just not vocalizing it. And that's okay. That's his right. That's his privilege and, responsibility. That comes first, because to do that to families, that still have unsolved cases would be kind of a horrifying thing to do if it ever turned out not to be the case.
I think you have to look at it from a PR standpoint that if David Paulides went out and said Bigfoot's stealing your babies, people aren't going to, he's going to get turned off to like every other nut job. He becomes just as bad as the Sylvia Browns out there, the psychics out there. And how many psychics have also been involved with some of these disappearances? Was involved in the Dennis Martin. As Bake and I were reading The Cold Vanish or listening to The Cold Vanish on the way home, the parents of the father, Randy, contacting psychics about his son. A psychic called him and said his son was fraternizing with a family of Bigfoot around a lake up there. So, as much as we like to keep the esoteric separate, they find their way into these real life scenarios. And, here we go, a Sasquatch show talking about missing people. And, people are like, well, if you don't think Bigfoot's part of it, what the hell is your angle? No, and we're not saying that. I'm saying you have to keep your ears open to the potentiality of the fact that it could be.
Right.
But we're not saying that's it either. We're just putting the potential out there. And it gets convoluted and it gets very messy. But, you and I aren't writing books about it. We're not out there presenting on it. And we're not trying to draw attention to this very serious issue, which is that there's people missing. Now, and without regurgitating what I just said over the last 5 minutes, let's move on here a little bit to some of these things that David had pointed out. And he actually does a presentation of this in one of the documentaries, but he calls them the missing 411 profile points, right? And that's, again, we talked about at the beginning of the show, these cases of all these missing people have very common themes. And these profile points, we'll talk about them line by line here, and how they're also important into what we do. First being point of separation. There's always a point where these people get usually ahead of the people they're with and disappear. Right. Which is interesting. You either lose sight of them or and sometimes they have fallen backwards, but generally it's they have gone ahead or they've gone solo.
Right.
At some point they disconnect from the people they're with and they just vanish. No trace. Or sometimes they find a shoe or something, a little down the line. Time of disappearance is also very interesting, which the most common theme to that is mid to late afternoon. Well, this is where when you start talking about Bigfoot, it gets interesting because you look at the Bigfoot sighting data out there and you can look at it and spin it whatever different ways. In fact, people keep trying to do this with moon data, right? The moon phases. Well, we get more Bigfoot sightings in full moon, which by the way, we don't, but they like to make that connection. And it's the same, like, Bigfoot sightings happen at night. No, not really. A lot of these sightings happen in the daytime, and sometimes, specifically the ones I've investigated in this part of Pennsylvania, have been mid to late afternoon.
Right.
Coincidentally, the same time that the David Paulides, cases that he's investigated, not all, but some, also happen to disappear. So once again, there's another connection you could put together, right? Boulder fields. That one was interesting to me, that a lot of these areas are surrounded by boulders or areas where they're really rocky and and that's really important because when you have these younger people, as you start making that terrain more difficult, you think it would really slow these kids down or anybody down and make it a lot harder for them to transgress through these areas, right?
Sure.
They talk about these kids disappearing, guys, and they find them 6 miles or up thousands of feet of elevation where, a grown man would have a difficult time getting to.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Boulder
Something
field
very
is
interesting
a
about that,
commonality.
right? Why do you think that is, Vance? What's your thought on the boulder fields?
Well, it depends on what aspect.
Hiccups.
I've heard a couple of variations that the boulder fields generally have high concentrations of granite. And, there's been a lot of, I don't want to say the woo, but maybe it is the woo. But,
you said it, so.
Granite fields, they have mystical things going on in the granite fields, and there's quartz. And, hey, there might be something tangible there, but,
Now, quartz I've heard, but I've not heard the granite.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Six of
It's
one, half dozen of the
interesting,
other.
but I don't have a take on specifics regarding why
Yeah.
a boulder field, unless unless there's a boulder that is
Say it again.
covering an entrance to an underground natural cave system. I don't know.
Well, that's interesting because I don't have the graphic up for tonight because I've only did three
Mhm.
quarters of my homework. I'm sorry, listeners.
No.
But that map that was provided on Reddit, and it was
Mhm.
shared into the End of the Fray radio group by one of Shannon's listeners. And congratulations, Shannon, on your
Mhm.
Paranormal Podcast Award. And same with our friend Ryan Sprague. Good job, guys. We're proud of you.
Mhm.
Side
Yes.
note there. Job well done. That there was a map created where a lot of these missing people sightings happen along these, cave systems, which also kind of correspond with national parks. So
Mhm.
you start putting two and two together, and what do you get?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
No, it's interesting. You could overlay those maps on top of each other. We're missing people in concentrations and lay that over the cave, and it's very similar to each other. It's creepy. This is definitely
No,
creepy.
yeah, and I hate to say that though, Vance, because I don't think there's a town that's not touched by a missing person. Right.
No.
But I
I'm
think
just
what
saying
we're
for
talking
the
about.
concentration, right?
Yeah, no, and I wanted to make that point, like, because people will say that, like, well,
Mm-hmm.
people go missing from every town, and you're not wrong,
Mm-hmm.
except for we're talking about concentrations of people,
Mm-hmm.
what David Paulides calls these clusters
Cluster, right?
that show up, and when you overlay them on the map, they just kind of, they line up.
They
Like
line up. Yeah. No, it
there,
is kind of creepy.
it is. It's very creepy, but there's got to be something to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so beyond Boulder Field, next.
Near water.
Mm-hmm.
Near water, right? And
Mhm.
water source is really important. He always travels the creeks, right? We hear that a lot through every Bigfoot folk story there is. Legend of Boggy Creek.
Which
You're
again,
also
let me interrupt real quick just on that news segment that I did. It's along the Snake River.
Mhm.
And it's not just that this undiscovered bipedal creature would seem likely to be able to travel great distances using rivers just because of the fact it's a less of an obstacle through woods, but natural wild animals do the same thing. They'll migrate along rivers because of the clearing. So it kind of
Yeah.
makes sense. And to have that case that I just reported along the Snake River in Idaho, and in Idaho and Oregon border there, that's a hot spot. There's a lot of sightings in that area. It is a
Yeah.
hot spot. Not saying that's what happened to Michael, but it's a coincidence.
Yeah. And I
Next.
mean, most of these people are hiking, fishing,
Mhm.
fishing activities. We go back to Dior, right? Dior Coons from the Missing 411 documentary. That story just sticks in my mind because it's fresh for me. But again, Boulder Field,
Mhm.
point of separation, late afternoon disappears. Near water, there's a creek that his mom and dad were fishing at.
Mhm.
And then after the water, they all add up, and a lot of these cases do. In fact, some of these data points David was looking at is the potentiality for these younger college guys, getting inebriated and falling into a body of water.
Mhm.
And, sadly, that happened to a friend of mine. Her brother had gotten, intoxicated at a bar in town, which is usually, what you do when you go to a bar. And he had was walking across the Market Street Bridge, and he went missing. Nobody had seen him, but the theory is he had fallen into the bridge because I think a month later or so, they found his body
Mhm.
near Harrisburg, washed up. And, we know Bigfoot didn't do that, right?
Mhm.
But the fact is, up until they found his body, he fell into that same pattern that David Paulides was investigating,
Mhm.
well-built younger men that are going, disappearing for no particular reason.
Mhm.
And you got to wonder how much of this too happens because of that. But you shouldn't have 2 or 3-year-old intoxicated walking around,
No.
unattended in watershed areas either. So I mean, there's just a
Right.
lot. some of these data points, like I said, they don't all coincide, but they have similar elements within them.
Mm-hmm.
Weather events, after they disappear, the weather gets rough, making finding them very difficult.
I think that's one of the most common things that
It is.
that happens. Once a person goes missing, there'll be a search party coordinated, and then it seems within minutes, once that assembles, the weather just turns horrendous, whether it's heavy rains or heavy snow. And you brought that up on the last show. Is this opportunistic? I don't know.
Well, and our next data point does that. But when you start talking about weather events, and these people missing clothes, missing shoes, potentially succumbing to hypothermia or dying of exposure, most of the time when they disappear, they're not planning on encountering these weather events either, right? So you got a twofer there. Something's opportunistic in taking them, or they really are succumbing to just natural things that are happening. Though I just don't understand people dying of exposure in like 50-degree weather. I can imagine you getting cold, but I don't imagine it causing hypothermia.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
I guess it's all depending on how you're dressed. And, look, it's been 50 today, and I've worn my robe around all day today. It was colder than hell.
No, and it was so sexy too.
I know, wasn't it? Like Hugh Hefner over here. The next point, disability or illness.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gets sick or they're disabled already, deaf,
Mm-hmm.
hard of hearing.
Down syndrome is a number of cases.
When you start taking away some of those natural senses or the capacity, you become opportunistic for potential prey, right? But sometimes it's like these things almost know it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I go back to, moving from the missing 411, I always go back to the locals. Tom Powell's book, where there's the story of the young girl who's deaf,
Mm-hmm.
and she's visited at her home oftentimes by a Sasquatch creature. And, that just makes for a very interesting story. Like, for some reason, he, chose to communicate with her. And, it's ongoing. But I guess one night, if I remember the story correctly, it's been some time since I read the book, that the girl's father is in an accident, wrecks his car, and the Sasquatch actually brings him to his house. And it's the young girl that finds him. So that was always interesting. And you got to wonder how much of this, Henry, are you familiar with that story from Tom Powell's book, The Locals?
Yes, I am. It's been a while since I've read the book, but I am familiar with it.
Do you remember the name of the girl from that story? They did use a name. I don't know if it was probably wasn't a real name. I actually said it before we came on the air, and now I can't remember it at all because that's how life goes. But anyhow, if you get a copy of The Locals by Tom Powell, folks, one of my favorite Bigfoot books, and it's got some really interesting offbeat stories in that book that you're not going to read in other books, stuff John Green's not going to talk about because he's dead now. And, but even before that, he just wasn't writing books that kind of had those type of stories in them.
Mm-hmm.
Canines not able to find scent or lose the track quickly.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but a lot of the canines refuse.
Yeah.
There's a number of cases where the handlers can't even get the dogs to cooperate to do what they've been trained to do. There's just a refusal from the dogs to take a trail. And that's really peculiar within itself.
And if you've not been part of a search and rescue effort with dogs, I encourage you to do so because it's pretty extraordinary. James and I mentioned this on the last show, were part of a dog training. And James, that was intense because those dogs are good.
Mm-hmm.
That was a segue for James.
That's okay. And
Sorry, I got a lot of background noise, so I've been muting my mic between the dog and some other things. But yeah, it's amazing the training the dogs go through. I mean, you could put somebody an acre away and they would figure out where that person was without any trouble. Like it's one of those situations where that dog is fixated on that specific task and there's nothing going to dissuade it, So it's amazing that they can't find more, when they do use the animals.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's remarkable, and a lot of times it's just from like a quick whiff of a T-shirt or something. Once they get that scent, man, those dogs are off. And
Mhm.
we witnessed this for a whole afternoon of them just training and doing
Oh,
exercise. But it was incredible to see
Mhm.
how just extraordinary these animals are, and for this to happen. And I'm sure the ones that they're using on these are trained even more, and they're even different types of dogs. Cadaver
Mhm.
dogs don't work,
Right.
bloodhounds don't work, or they work to a point and then they just disappear, and that rarely happens. Now,
Mhm.
one could make the argument, well, maybe the weather washes it away or something like that. Yeah, but that's a potentiality for any situation that these dogs are used to working in. And you're
Mhm.
not talking about something that has like dead nose like us. You're talking about something that's got an incredible, honed, skilled scent,
Mhm.
ability to detect scent. And it's just
hmm
strange to me that this happens, because
Mhm.
it also goes into the next point that a lot of times these people, deceased or even alive, are found in areas that were searched.
Mhm. Yeah, which is such a creep factor to begin with. They have gone
Yeah.
over the area 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and then the body is discovered in the area that they just combed over, weeks later, and there's the
hmm
body. And then in some of the
Yeah.
cases, it doesn't appear that the body was moved. I,
Mm-mm.
I just, how do you, that's just so creepy within itself.
I go into a high strangeness case with that one, which is the Todd Seas case that we've talked with Butch
Hmm.
Witkowski and even Lon Strickler, an awful lot about. And he was found in an area they had already searched, and when they
Hmm.
found him, his body was not in good condition. Something
Hmm.
should have smelt that.
Hmm.
Right. And let's be honest, when you have these searches going on, they're not just 100 people walking all willy nilly trying to find
No.
somebody. Most of the
Yeah.
time it's, grid like, search like patterns so they could go through. They talk about this in Missing 411, The Hunted, the documentary.
Hmm.
Folks like Vance said, check these out because, whether you
Hmm.
like David Paulides or not, the man's putting this work in and bringing something to the table that nobody else has done yet.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have taken his work and tried to claim it for their own and do all
Yeah.
these things. And then they get
And that's
pissed
going to
because
happen.
he files a copyright claim, but do your own homework. Or
Hmm.
if you're going to borrow his work, give him credit for it.
Hmm.
But these things that they're so extraordinary that there's so many of these data points that are
Hmm.
just that line up amongst these cases so well. Missing clothes. That's another one. Very common to find a shoe or missing clothes. And
Hmm.
then finally, an unknown cause of death. That when they do find these bodies, there's no reason why they should be dead.
Hmm.
Right.
And I
Hmm.
don't know about you, but that freaks me out. Like, there's no
Right.
reason why they should be dead.
Right. Yeah, and there's variables in that case. I remember one case, but I can't give specifics to names or anything, where a body was discovered in a ravine, but the body had no evidence of damage of falling down the ravine. It was
Hmm.
as if it was tossed off the ravine, and the impact is when it hit the bottom, not a
Yeah.
slip and fall and you roll down the hill. And that case in itself kind of freaked me out. How did that body end up sustaining such damage from such a fall, but yet there was no impact damage to the body as if it hit boulders and trees and scratches on the way down? That was not apparent. And
And I
I'll
go
touch
back
back
to,
something real quick.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
in the cadaver dogs and scent dogs, uh, currently right now there is a federal program that's actually using turkey vultures in the same
Oh,
capacity because turkey vultures have the highest scent
yeah.
capabilities,
You know,
because they can pick up death from 20 miles away in just one molecule, and they can pick it up and hone in on it and find it. So
No.
they're currently in training with turkey buzzards, and I find that interesting. They would get to the point of location a little bit faster, I would think, than a dog, but
usually every Monday, James and I go somewhere to like whether it's out to the land or whatnot. And every time, James, does it fail that we see turkey vultures or vultures,
I think
circling around. And I always say to them, well, something's dead over there. Because you know what that is? That's like an international sign for death.
Death, right.
And have you ever seen a vulture? They're ugly too. They're not the,
Oh, we have so many of them here, Sean. It's crazy.
Not the prettiest looking creatures.
They're
on the
huge.
planet.
No, they're big. You don't want to.
Yeah.
They're prehistorically huge.
Yeah.
Well, I saw one get hit by a truck one day as it wouldn't leave what it
Oh.
was feeding off of, and it got a little
Oh.
too fat to fly, and oof,
Yeah. Well,
that was
that
a hell
just
of a mess. But
gives its
He
brother
became
something to eat.
carrion.
I think I'm going to have to research that one a little bit, Vance. The federal program with turkey vulture. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and
Yeah.
a little morbid, but very interesting. And I go back to, like I said, because these cases are in my mind. Dior Coons is still missing. Since 2015, he's still missing. And two of the three private investigators working on that case have either recused themselves or dropped it because they didn't feel that people were being quite honest in their recounting. A lot of varying accounts between family members. Very sketchy situation. If you go and watch the Missing 411, just the first documentary, and it really opens your eyes to some of these things that you just don't think about. Kind of what we're doing here. Yeah, we look at these Missing 411, what did I call them in my notes here? Profile points, and you can relate a lot of Bigfoot data with this stuff, man. You could connect those dots and, definitively say, hey, there's something to this. But at the end of the day, there's the one thing that we don't even have to prove that Bigfoot exists. And that's, the proof that Bigfoot exists.
It exists, right.
Yeah. One more note from Brian here. Paulides offers an open challenge to anyone during his presentations to take a look at those conditions and all the missing people and come up with an acceptable explanation. So far, no one has. And I had gone on to Reddit today. There's a Reddit or an r/missing people. And because I told you, one of the things I wanted to find was criticisms toward David Paulides and, things that weren't personal attacks, because I think it's easy to discredit someone's work by attacking the person, not the work.
Yep.
Right. You can't put a dent in the work. So you're going to try to put a dent in the person. And nobody's come up with anything that I've seen that I, think is, an alternate setup like there. And not that he's definitively put a stamp on something that it is, but there's just something more to this that meets the eye. And I get uncomfortable with it. It doesn't make me feel good.
No, it doesn't make any of us feel good. No, there's, again, I keep using that word creep factor, but it's creep factor. Especially all the similarities, when you go through any of the Missing 411, especially in the first books, when you start to realize this person went missing, there was notification to either park rangers, they organize, and then the weather turns to crap. It was just, it happened so often. And it's like, okay, is the weather that common that it turns to crap that often? Well, people wouldn't be going camping there for the weekend if that were the case. National parks wouldn't be that way. But it seems to happen a lot in these cases. Again, is it opportunistic of a entity of some sort to say, oh, well, the weather's going to be turning crappy here pretty soon. I better go snatch myself something.
It's time to go find lunch. It's going to rain.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
again, we
Well-
always go back to that analogy of, oh, it's eating people. I might not necessarily buy into that, but I don't
know. I don't think it's a snack food, but
Yeah.
man, I don't know. And it just puts it, but if you got to eat, you got to eat. And, humans often resort to eating each other in extreme situations. It's happened. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that. Is it a fantastic explanation? Absolutely. It takes an awful lot of personal, I don't know, bias to throw it away and say it's just not a potentiality.
Mhm.
Right. But, if you're in the field that we're in and you do the research we do, well, Bigfoot's more of a realistic thing to us than it is to most people anyhow.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And something like this wouldn't be outside the realm of
No.
animal behavior. Mountain
It's
lions do it. Bears do it.
Right.
These things
Oh.
attack people.
Yeah,
Why would we?
that's one thing I wanted to bring up that I forgot. That's one thing that David does is predation. He can immediately eliminate the predation aspect of it. And yes, there are a lot of cases where a mountain lion, took out a hiker, and okay,
We
there's
do
enough
see that,
evidence of
yes.
that. Yes, we do see that, and those get eliminated from any of these storylines. It's the lack of evidence, and you brought up earlier, like David does. It's usually the ones, if it's on a hiking trip, you generally are walking in single file. That's how you go hiking. It's single file. And then, one will be, 20 yards ahead of everybody else on a curve, and that person is now gone. And it happens more often with the person in the lead than it does with the person in the back. You would think it would be the exact opposite, but it's not. And that's weird within itself.
Well, just think about that, though. Most of the people that are leading from the front are kind of the steadfast trailblazing type.
Mhm.
They're usually, the, I don't want to say alpha male or alpha female
but
type, but generally they have that,
the
and they
prize.
usually,
Yeah.
they have to, for some reason be ahead of everybody, and they get ahead of people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't know if you've ever gone hiking or walked with me and Baker anywhere. There's usually not
I
a whole
can't keep
lot
up
of
with you,
people
man.
that-
It's just
Yeah,
you'll be the
I
one to
can
go
move.
because you're ahead of the line.
Yeah. I can move for a little guy.
Yeah,
I
you
got
can.
some traction, but
Yes,
you ever put
Like a
James and
large
I?
zebra.
Uh,
Yeah, James and I couldn't hike side by side because there's not a trail big enough. That could,
mhm. Oh,
and that's
hey.
just me.
Wow.
It's not
So
that bad.
Yeah. You only get scraped on the shoulders a few times. It's
Well,
not that
and
bad.
Brian asks a really good question in the chat here. Yes, if there's signs of animal predation, Paulides doesn't include it, but should he? And to me, that answer should be yes. And because I think when you take out data, you're contaminating data.
Mhm.
A lie of omission, or a still a lie. A lie by omission is still a lie, and you're falsifying the true data set.
Mhm.
And it also looks like you're altering the data to fit what you want.
You paint a narrative, absolutely.
Mhm.
But I think to the point is, if it's evident that it is, he just takes it out. It's not included.
Mhm.
So I think it's not. He's using that information to paint the picture. He's just not putting it in there. And if you have a pattern of big cats attacking people at one park, that data should still be included in the set. Even if there's no evidence that a big cat was responsible for that person, it should still be in there as a potentiality. There's no evidence that Bigfoot's beating these people to death and eating them either, but we're talking about it. So,
No, it's a good point. Thanks, Brian. Good point.
Yeah, that's great.
Now
This
you're
is why
screwing
he's
me
our-
up now.
that's why he's our showrunner right there. The guy that helps put this show on each and every week, which you can too for as little as $2 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Patreon.com/Sasquatch Experience. Any final comments, questions, or concerns for everybody tonight on the show?
Yeah, definitely. If you're so inclined, at least watch those two documentaries on YouTube. They're free. Also, David Paulides does on average once a week at the Can-Am Missing Project on YouTube. You can subscribe and you get notifications, and he'll talk about 3 cases within relevant, well, he does go back and forth, but current cases that are all fitting the same narrative. Who these people are goes into a bit of a background. It's him talking. He'll show pictures. He'll show maps where these people went missing, the correlation and similarities of other cases. This terrain looks very similar to this person going missing in this terrain. And again, there's still no answers, but it's the Can-Am Missing Project on YouTube. It's David Paulides copywritten channel, and it's interesting. He generally
It
runs
is.
about 30 minutes or so, and he's on at least once a week. And again, if he ever ends up watching this episode, I know he's going through a really tough period with the loss of his son, and it's hard for him to keep going forward, but he keeps going forward, and that says a lot about dedication.
Absolutely. I think it says a lot about his character too, that even through personal tragedy, he's still going to boot up and, you know, get
Right.
other people through their own personal tragedies by
Right.
missing a loved one, right? This isn't easy. And folks, for any information that could help locate any missing child, please contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, missingkids.org, or call 24/7 1-800-843-5678. Let's help bring some of these kids home, or help at
Please.
least, you know, calm the minds of some worried folks out there. It's a serious situation going on out there. We don't have to paint the ugly picture for you, but we do thank you for tuning in and listening to us each and every week here on the Sasquatch Experience. I'm Sean Forker. That's Vance Nesbitt. He's James Baker. And Henry May, why don't you go ahead and give him those final words?
Y'all be good or be good at it.
Next week, folks, we'll be back. Episode 38, Abducted. Stories of Sasquatch abduction. These aren't going to be missing 411 stories per se, but we're going to kind of start relevating to some of these thoughts as we go along. Next week, we'll see you. Good night, everybody.